You're listening to Boomers Today with your host, Frank Sampson.
Well, welcome to Boomers Today. I'm your host, Frank Sampson. Of course, each week we bring you important and very useful information on issues facing baby boomers, their parents, and other loved ones. And I can't thank all of you enough. I know I mention this each week, but I need to because our listeners are growing every single day, and it's because of you sharing our podcast, shows, individual shows with friends and family, and I can't thank you enough. So many of you are, listening to the show various ways, on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, all of those, iHeartRadio. Many of you also go to our website at boomerstodayradio.com. So I just want to thank you. And I know why our listeners are growing because we have wonderful guests. And today's not going to be any different. We have with us Jaime Sarche, whose goal is helping people be less afraid of death. A seasoned speaker, Jaime brings deep experience in death care to a broad range of audiences around the country, sharing insights and approaches on how to have those difficult conversations and how to address sensitive issues. Extending well beyond death and dying, her message resonates across industries and individuals, bringing her passion to demystify death while enlightening communicators on overcoming challenging conversations. So Jaime, thank you so much for joining us on Boomers Today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, it's such a pleasure, Frank. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no, it's an important subject matter, a subject matter that people don't like talking about, which is why we're going to talk about it. And as you know, I'm in the long-term care industry, and that's also a subject matter people don't like talking about. But there's no guarantee somebody's going to need long-term care, though it's likely once you get a certain age. But one thing I know, and nobody's proved me wrong, that there's 100% chance that people are going to unfortunately pass away. But that's just the way it is. So they need to talk about it. So I'm glad we're having this conversation today. So how did you get into this field?
That's always the first question people ask me because I am a very positive and joyous person, and I am not usually what people envision when they think about somebody who talks about death or helps people put their funeral plans in place. But really, I've always been somebody who likes to talk about hard stuff. I always have pushed against taboo subjects. So, I was an AIDS educator in the 80s in college. I was a peer counselor. I was always the one my friends turned to if they were worried that they had a sexually transmitted disease or they were worried they were pregnant. I was the one that they turned to because they knew I could handle the very hard things that they were dealing with and help them figure out how to navigate it. And when I was about 26 years old, one of my very close friends, Michelle, who I had known since 9th grade and whose husband I had known since we were 4, was diagnosed with a glioblastoma. So that's a terrible brain tumor. It's what Ted Kennedy died of. It's what John McCain died of. It is a terminal brain tumor. And everyone said to Michelle, "You're young, you're strong, you're going to beat this." And I found myself handling it in a completely different way, which was to go to her and just say, I can be with you in this. I don't have to tell you everything's going to be okay. And you don't have to tell me everything is going to be okay, because we both know it's not going to be okay. And I'm here for you to talk about whatever it is that you need. And that was a very powerful time. It was many conversations. She died 16 or 18 months later. And I feel her with me every day, and doing this work keeps her with me. And when fast forward many years, when I was 40, which is 13 years ago, is when I heard that Jim Cohen, who's the owner of the funeral home where I work, was looking for someone to do prearranged funeral planning. And I didn't know anything about it, but I knew it was the job I was supposed to have. And every day I still think that. He never had somebody doing a program before. I truly didn't get any training. And I just created this incredible program that really helps people to get their own plans in place, hopefully decades before they need them, which allows them to have a lot of peace of mind, and also allows their loved ones at the time of a death to just have the path paved for them. So they don't have to think, they don't have to make a myriad decisions. All they have to do is show up and be in their feelings and process whatever it is that they're experiencing.
So when you have two or more people, like a husband, wife, or a parent, child, or partners, whatever, and one is open to talking about it and planning, and the other one doesn't want to go there, keeps putting it off, keeps putting it off. I would think that's pretty common. I mean, you're in the field, I'm not, but I would think it's pretty common. How do you handle those situations?
Yeah.
How do you suggest?
Well, it's pretty darn challenging.
Yeah.
I do find that many people are afraid to start the conversation, but once we get the plans done, they invariably lean back in their chair and go, oh my God, that was so much easier than I anticipated. And they're always very grateful that they've done it. But quite honestly, Frank, there are some people who will never do it. My own father is an estate planning attorney, and this is what I do. And there's no way in the world he will ever put his funeral plans in place, because he is convinced that if he puts his plans in place, he will die. And the truth of the matter is, he will die. The question becomes, will he die with a plan in place or not? And so there's very little that I can do to convince somebody to do this. And quite honestly, that's not my role. I am trying very hard to help people to move past the fear, but there are some people that that's just beyond my pay grade. So often when it's just one person in a relationship that wants to do it, they'll come and do the plans for both people. And that happens, and it happens regularly. And when the children are worried about it and they don't want their parents to plan, I really encourage the parents to ignore that, because the children just are afraid of their parents' death. And I mean the adult children. I'm not talking about 5-year-olds. I'm talking about 60-year-olds.
Right. Exactly.
They are afraid to think about their parents' death. They don't want to. They don't want their parents thinking about it. It's terrifying to them. So they will often say to their parents, no, I'll take care of this at the time. You don't have to do it. And I really think that that is a mistake. I think that it is, quite honestly, disrespectful to their parents' needs. And it is a mistake for themselves, because when they are grieving, it's that much harder. It will be that much more expensive. The time of a death of a loved one is an incredibly easy time for wedges to come into the family. And sitting in a small room with a funeral director making big decisions when you're least able to think, when you're so raw, is really, it's not the best way to do it. And quite honestly, when it is the one thing that we know we're going to need, why would we do that other than fear?
Right. Yeah.
And denial.
Yeah. No, a very good point. So talk to me why ritual is so important in this whole process.
Well, it's really interesting, Frank, because we live in a society that is very death denying, as we just were talking about. We don't experience many deaths. You know, we have very effective medical care for the vast majority of our life. And then in the last parts of many of our lives, we're having a lot of medical care, whether it's effective for a high quality or a high quality life. We could, you know, I guess that depends on whose situation it is. But at the time of a death, what people are really thinking about is there's a dead body. We got to get rid of the dead body. And they're just, they don't know that they have grief needs. And they want desperately to be done with grieving. And so they think if we just get rid of the dead body, then we can go back to normal and feel better. And that just isn't true. Emotions, if they are not processed, if they are not expressed, stay in our cells. And ritual is an incredibly helpful way to give us a container for those emotions, to help us figure out how to express those emotions. And we have lots of rituals in our world. You know, people think of religion as having a lot of rituals, and that's true. But even if you're not a religious person, you have rituals in your life. I mean, I often ask people, do you know why we wear a cap and gown to a graduation?
Interesting. Yeah.
No,
it's good
know
comparison.
Answer?
Do I know the answer of why? You know, I don't.
Yeah.
That's a great question. I don't.
I don't either, Frank. It's just what we do.
Right.
And it helps us know how to feel. It helps us to know where we are. It's really important. Have you ever gone to a birthday party and they served pie? That's really upsetting.
Yeah. Right.
I'm still mad about a Thanksgiving when somebody brought cake. I mean, that's just not what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And we need what we know.
No turkey, you know, no turkey.
Right. Or no turkey. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Even if you're a vegetarian, you still probably, I mean, my sister-in-law is a vegetarian, brings tofurkey. You know, it's not because it's delicious, it's because it's Thanksgiving.
That's right.
So, you know, I think that that's what we need to recognize is that ritual, it's for when we don't have words. And when somebody dies, we don't have words. And when we do ritual, it helps us take that person, the dead person, from where they are to where they need to be. And it helps us to start on the path to our new normal as well.
Yeah. So what are those options of caring for someone who has already, you know, passed, that body? I mean,
I'm a big believer in using the word died.
Okay. All right. People who died. All right.
For me, I just think that that's part of being less afraid of death is that if we use the correct terminology, it helps us to embrace the reality of it. Mm-hmm. And so as far as those choices, it really depends on where you live. In Colorado, there's a lot of choices. That's where I live. In Colorado, you could have a traditional burial, which I'm going to say is going to be something that like Catholics often do, which is embalming, a viewing, a metal casket, maybe a metal vault, and a burial. You could do a green burial, which means no embalming, a biodegradable casket or no casket. And there's no state in the country that you are required to have embalming. No cemetery requires embalming for an in-ground burial. There's no reason to have embalming for crossing state lines, and most people don't know that. So just so your audience can know that you don't need to add chemicals to a body unless you want to. There's also, of course, fire cremation, and most people know of it, but they don't really know about it. And fire cremation, oftentimes people choose because they think that it's better environmentally. It really is not a great environmental choice because it is having the body placed in a an oven, which is known as a retort, with an open flame. It's 1800 degrees. It takes a lot of gas to make that happen. It's like as much gas as a cross-country car trip. And all of the emissions from the burning are going up into the atmosphere. So the gas is going into the atmosphere. Everything from our bodies is going up into the atmosphere. The fire is used to burn away the tissue. And then what's left is bone that is filled with the gas. And that bone is put through a processor, which is known as a cremulator. And what we get back in an urn, we call that ash, but it's really ground bone. And then in Colorado and some other states, maybe 12 other states, there's a different method of getting to bone that then gets processed called alkaline hydrolysis. So what happens in that case is the body is placed in a vessel with water and an alkali that's similar to liquid soap. And the alkali rapidly decomposes the tissue, and then what's left is bone, but it's totally natural bone. So it's not filled with any gas. That bone is also put through a processor, but it is filled with the nutrients. It actually does feed plants. The ground bone from a fire cremation can be toxic to plants. So if you want to, not be buried, alkaline hydrolysis, which is also known as aquamation, water cremation, is a great choice. And in Colorado and just a few other states, Washington, California, maybe New York, I can't remember if New York actually passed it. There is something called body composting. And while green burial, a body would compost in the cemetery plot, in about 4 to 6 years, everything would be gone. In body composting, the body is not placed in the ground. It's placed in a vessel with 4 times the body weight of organic matter and has really good airflow and a little bit of agitation. And in about 2 to 6 months, depending on the process used, everything is turned to compost. Now, about midway through, the bones have to be removed and they are put through a cremulator, similar to a cremulator, because they cannot compost in that short amount of time. But it is really a great way to do it. And then at the very end, when the whole composting process is done, everything has turned to soil. And there's nothing human about it anymore. And that can be taken to, a farm. It can be taken to just for land restoration. And it's really a great environmental choice and actually sequesters carbon out of the atmosphere.
The cremation option you mentioned, using, I don't know what the proper term is, but, using water, all right? And you said that's only in maybe a handful of states. Why is that? Why is it not in other states?
Well, I think the truth of the matter is that, most funeral homes in the country are owned by only a couple of entities. So most funeral homes are owned by Service Corp International, or they're owned by Parklawn. There are a couple other big corporations that own all these funeral homes, even though they still maintain family names. And they're happy to continue to do business as usual. And so, you need to have more progressive people that want to offer these options. And sometimes some laws have to be changed. For body composting, the laws had to be changed in Washington, California, Colorado. So that's part of it, I'm quite certain. And also probably that people don't want to think about death. So they just ignore the options.
Exactly. All right, Jane, we're going to take a real quick break, I promise. When we come back, I'll have you share with people how they could learn more about what you're doing. And also we'll talk a little bit more about the whole grieving and planning ahead. And so I'll be right back with you. Okay. So do you know anybody who may be concerned about an older driver? Well, Senior Care Authority's Beyond Driving with Dignity program is a facilitated self-assessment program for older drivers. This program has been designed to serve as a vital tool to facilitate older drivers and their families as they make appropriate decisions regarding the future of one's safe driving career. If the individual is a safe driver, an advisor will provide him or her with strategies on how to remain a safe driver as they progress through the aging process. If driving retirement is the appropriate decision, then the individual and their family are offered possible alternatives, resources, and a specific plan to ensure a smooth and successful transition from the driver's seat to the passenger seat. So to learn more, you can go to www.beyonddrivingwithdignity.com or call 877-907-8841 to connect with a Senior Care Authority advisor in your area. We're back with Jaime Sarche, who is a expert in helping people be less afraid of death. That's, I guess, the bottom line, right, Jaime? Yeah. So
yes, that's really my mission in life.
So what about support for those, who are grieving? And it could be, this could be grieving, obviously, for someone who passed away. Sometimes it's grieving for someone who's maybe even still alive, that maybe they're just not the same person they were. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Oh, it's such a good point. I mean, so many people are grieving because their loved ones have gotten some sort of cognitive decline or real cognitive issues. And that really is a big grieving. And our society is so bad at this. We give people a couple of days to grieve, and then we sort of say to them, we treat them almost like we treat a toddler having a temper tantrum. And we say, okay, you go over in the corner and you do your emotional release on your own. And then when you can behave in a way that I feel comfortable with, you can come back. And I just think that we are so terrified of what we perceive as negative emotion that we just don't want to acknowledge grief. And we think that there's some end to it. And it really changes over time. When we have a loved one die, there are acute phases of grief, and then it recedes a little bit, and then there might be acute phases that come up again. I just told you about my friend Michelle. Her mom died just a few days ago, and I went to the funeral last week, and I went to the cemetery for the first time since I went for Michelle's burial. And it was real interesting because I drove in and I saw this headstone, and the name on it was Grieve. And then I went to, it was really powerful. And then I went to Michelle's plot and stood there and cried and cried and cried. And I felt it as deeply that day as I felt at the funeral. And what I was really recognizing was, while I missed her, what I was grieving right then was all the loss of potential. She died at about 28 years old. She was not yet 28 years old. We both had small children at the time of her death. And I grieved her loss of seeing her child grow up, and he's getting married this spring. And I also was grieving my loss of the couple friendship that we would have had she still lived. I was grieving the fact that my kids didn't grow up with her son, even though they would have had she still lived. And so, you know, most people would say to me, well, aren't you over that by now? No, I'm not over it, and I'll never be over it. And the truth of the matter is, I don't want to be over it. I love Michelle, and my grieving for her is the reflection of that love. Grief is not bad. And we should embrace the fact that grief isn't bad. It is a reaction to something that is bad, you know, and sometimes badder than other times. You know, when somebody has lived with Alzheimer's for years, maybe we feel like it was a relief. And that's okay to feel like their death is a relief. But we can still grieve. And we can still grieve all those years that maybe we couldn't connect with them because of the Alzheimer's, or, you know, whatever that looks like. So I don't know. I really wish that as a society, we could learn that we can't fix it and we shouldn't try. Our job as the friends and the loved ones of the grievers is just to be there with them, to sit with them, to put our hand on their shoulder. There are not magic words to make it go away, and we shouldn't try.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. I mean, unfortunately, many of us, me included, have gone through this with other loved ones, and you make a very good point. So Jaime, I meant to ask you before, but I'll ask you now. Why don't you share with our listeners, you know, anything about yourself, where they could learn more about what you're doing, anything you'd like to share?
I would love that. Thank you, Frank. Well, the first thing I'd like to share is I have a TED Talk, and it's called Breaking Down the Taboos about Talking About Death. So I would love for people who are interested to watch that, and they can just Google my name and TED. I also have a talk that's really, I would say it's TED for Jewish people. It's called Eli, E-L-I, and it's about Jewish ritual and how helpful Jewish ritual is to grieving. But quite honestly, it's just really a great primer on why ritual itself is really helpful in the face of grief. And again, they can just Google that. I love connecting with people on LinkedIn, and I do a lot of posts about this kind of thing. And they can always reach me at Feldman Mortuary in Denver. And we're the oldest family-owned funeral home in Colorado. And I'm really proud of the place where I am and all that we do, that even though we're the oldest family-owned funeral home, we do every option available. We are always looking for the better ways to get families' needs met, and we want them to be able to continue to live their values even after their death. And that's really why we do all the options available.
Do you yourself provide consultation for families that may not even be in Colorado, or do you can you put people in touch with professionals like yourself in helping?
Yeah, both.
Both. Okay, great. So talk to us a little bit. We unfortunately only have a couple minutes left, but let's talk about planning. So what advice can you give regarding planning ahead, when's the right time, etc.?
Okay, thank you. I really would say probably for your listeners, now is the right time.
Right.
Make your plans and make them with a funeral home that will lock in today's prices. The funding is held typically by an insurance policy that the funeral home would provide to you. And that's really a great way to do it. And it protects the consumer because then the funds are held by a third party. If the funeral home goes out of business, the money is still there for you. So I would say now is the time. None of us know when our death will be, But it's so fascinating how many people think they're going to know, and then they think that that's when they should do it. I literally met with a guy who is 97 years old, and he's called me many, many, many times over the years, but he's never done plans. And he was like, well, it just seems too early. And I just don't understand that at all.
Right.
I did my own plans when I was 42 years old. I really think that earlier is better. Although, you know, when you're at a certain stage of life, like when you have young children or whatever, you have other needs for your, you know, get life insurance in case, God forbid, you would die. And that's to cover lots of things for your family. But I say really like 50 and up is really the time to do it. And again, for the vast majority of your listeners, I am guessing they are all at the stage that they should be doing this. And oftentimes people are really considering doing it for their parents, but they don't think of themselves, and they really should.
Jaime Sarche, check out her TED Talk, Sarche. I'm sure you could do a search and find it. Jaime, thank you so much for joining us on Boomers Today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
And I want to thank everybody for joining us on Boomers Today. Please be safe. And we'll talk to everybody next week.
You've been listening to Boomers Today with Frank Sampson. To learn more about today's show, visit boomerstodayradio.com and join us next time for another edition of Boomers Today.